underneath the cap. Smelling the mushroom, and I'm comfortable tasting the mushroom, but we're not going to get much into that today. And then noting the environment it is found in, including the species of nearby trees. However, what we're focusing on today is the orange slice here, the photographs, and what we're looking for in those photographs in terms of a mushroom anatomy. So the first shot you need is a medium shot before picking, including the habitat. We're going to need a side shot after picking, including the intact stipe. And for those who aren't up to date on mushroom identification, or sorry, on anatomy, the stipe is the stem. We're going to need a close-up of the cap, demonstrating cap features. This is a gypsy mushroom. You can see there it's kind of wrinkled a little bit. And that's a defining feature. And then you're going to need a close-up of the fertile area beneath the cap. And this must be in focus. And now we're going to go through the reasons why by looking at the anatomy of these mushrooms. So when you're going through a book, like if you're out there on your own picking mushrooms and you're going through a book and you're brand new at this, and you think maybe you have a pine mushroom, and you go to that page, and this is what you see, okay? 5 inches across, that's obvious. Brown when young, becoming off-white, obvious. Convex, flattening out with age, becoming depressed. Cuticle smooth. Brown scales, margin enrolled when young, becoming slightly appendiculate with firm flesh. That's pretty daunting. There's a lot of words there. If you don't know what they mean, you're going to have to look it up. Then you go on to the gills. Off-white, close to crowded, adnex to adnate attachments, frequent short gills and white spores. Again, that's pretty daunting. That can be intimidating to try and figure out if that's actually what you're looking at. Then the stipe, and again, if you don't even know what a stipe is, what are you even reading? 5 inches high, off-white, cylindrical to fusoid, brown fibril scales beneath the nullus, central attachment firm and thick. Then you have a veil. What is a veil? We're going to go through that. Thick, membranous partial veil when young, off-white or streaked with brown. What's an annulus? Well, in this case, it'd be flaring to slightly sheathed, which really tells you nothing if you don't have some information about identification in terms of the anatomy of the mushroom. So why is the mushroom anatomy important for identification? Basic knowledge of mushroom anatomy will guide you in what to photograph. As you remember before, I showed you the 4 photographs you're going to need. Basic knowledge of mushroom anatomy will inform you on the points of reference needed when reading a mushroom book, because we just looked at that. It was pretty dense and hard to get through. There are many points of reference available for mushroom identification, and here are 7 of the basics. So the cuticle is basically the outer layer on top of the mushroom cap. It's something that you can often peel away, almost like we could call it like skin. The cap is this area itself where you see number 2. The margin is actually where the cap ends. It's like the ring around the bottom of the cap. The gills, which are the portion underneath the cap itself. Not all mushrooms have gills, so we can just call this the fertile area even. The veil is a membrane, usually leathery, but not always, that covers the gills when they are young and the mushroom is still developing. The stipe, number 6 here, is what some people would call the stem, but with mushrooms it's a stipe. And the annulus is a ring area. Sometimes it's like a floppy ring, sometimes it's hairs, but it's often what's left over from the veil when the mushroom expands. So let's start with the cap. What is a cap? Pretty much what you think it is. The top part of the structure, also known as a pileus. Some species of mushrooms have the potential for multiple or combinations of cap shapes, and cap shapes are vital to mushroom identification. So we're going to start with the cap shape. This is a convex shape. It's your basic round half globe cap shape. An example would be the prince mushroom. That's a convex mushroom. So the prince is a wonderful mushroom, by the way. It is like your table mushroom, like the ones that you just get from the store, an agaricus species, but they're often so large that they can be like several pounds. So a wonderful find. Flat cap shape. So just like it sounds, flat up top there. Often mushrooms will go through various stages of development as well. Many mushrooms will actually start off convex and then become flat as they age. But an example of a flatter mushroom than most would be the yellow knight. You can see that there. This does occur in Saskatchewan. We did find this mushroom on the August foray last year. Um, this is a toxic mushroom. This one can actually kill people. The next shape we're going to look at is conical. As you probably can guess, it's shaped like a cone. An example is a morel. And we have a cylindrical mushroom. I believe we had some talk here before the presentation about picking shaggy manes. That's a cylindrical mushroom, if ever there was one. It's shaped like a long vertical oval. Sometimes this will be found in young mushrooms as well before they open up. And the classic example is a shaggy mane. And I hope everybody here has eaten at least one of these. They are delicious. They come out in the fall. And spherical. So this is again another cap shape that is often found in young mushrooms before they open up. And an example would be an unopened shaggy parasol. That's different than a shaggy mane. I actually prefer shaggy parasols, and they come out a little bit sooner, but they are a delicious mushroom, one of my favorites. An umbonate cap shape. So an umbo is a little point in the middle of the cap, kind of almost giving it like a UFO look. And we have a number of mushrooms that look like this. An example would be a fiber cap here. We have a lot of fiber caps in Saskatchewan. They are all, to my knowledge, quite toxic um, and should be avoided. So knowing what an umbo looks like is a good way to go about that. Campanulate. So this is again getting into like some more difficult terms you may not have known. It's obvious what cylindrical is, right? Campanulate, not so much. This is shaped like a bell. We have some mushrooms that are shaped like bells. An example would be a bonnet mushroom. These are quite small usually. They grow on wood, but yeah,
And I'm
you
sorry,
can
and
see
what are
that
those
bell.
called?
These are called bonnet mushrooms.
Ronald.
These would
Okay,
be in the
thank you.
Mycena genus. Yeah, they're quite small. They're usually growing on wood. There's some very pretty ones. So this is a depressed mushroom cap. Again, this is very common, and often this is like the end stage of a mushroom cap that may have started off round or even flat. And the reason it's becoming depressed like that often is so it can catch rain, and the rain sort of jostles the mushroom around, and it overflows as well, and the rain kind of like carries the spores underneath. An example would be a mature Ricella that we see there, cap-shaped depressed. Um, and most Ricellas I don't think taste great, but the green ones I think taste very good. and funnel. So this is an exaggerated version of the depressed cap that we just saw with the Rosella. Funnel shape has the same effect. It fills with water, but often these are found in mushrooms called funnel caps. Here's an example of a funnel cap. And looking inside, you would see a very deep cup. All right, so I'm going to move on. Any questions at all about cap shapes? I'll take that as a no.
Oh,
Okay.
doing well.
Sorry, what was that? Hmm. Anyways, we're going to talk about the cuticle next. If you recall, the cuticle is that outside layer that can often be peeled away of the mushroom cap. The cuticle is again vital to identifying a mushroom. And this is one of the reasons why we want that very, very close-up shot of the mushroom itself. Some mushrooms will actually have a combination of cuticles, which can be a little bit confusing for some. And some cuticles can change qualities as the mushroom matures. So smooth top. An example would be an aspen bolete. It's just you run your finger over it, and it's just a regular old smooth mushroom. Another example would be just the one from the store, right? Your button mushroom. And an aspen bolete, by the way, is a wonderful mushroom to eat. We had so many of them in Saskatchewan. Here is a velvety cuticle, a fine velvet-like layer, very soft. An example would be the Dyer's polypore here. And this is a mushroom that is used, as the name would suggest, for dyes when people go picking them. But if you run your finger across it, it'll be velvety soft. The tomentose cuticle. So the cap is hairy or woolly, and you can see that there on the margin here, this woolliness that will actually be across the whole cap. This is aptly named a bearded milk cap. These tend to be extremely spicy to eat. Um, Generally, I wouldn't recommend eating them because they're also quite bitter. Fibrillose. Cap cuticle is comprised of either tightly packed radial fibers or upraised fibers. And you can see that there. This is one I actually picked out at the St. Cyr hiking trails. Um, Very dense. This is a fiber cap mushroom, again, one of those toxic ones that we spoke about earlier. Also, if you recall, we see that umbo very clearly here. Slimy. So some of these mushrooms will actually be slimy when they're wet or moist. An example would be the cowboy's handkerchief right here, which is a disgusting thing to hold. People do eat it, but again, if you like the taste of slime, um, yeah, this is something that's become like when it starts drying off, it would just become sticky and tacky. So it has a scaly cuticle. These form. This is a mushroom called a shaggy parasol. You can see at the bottom right-hand corner, it doesn't yet have those scales. It's actually like a solid brown, and the mushroom expands, and that solid brown cuticle is actually quite firm. It's almost like brittle, and as the mushroom expands, it breaks away into these beautiful scales, upraised scales there. Here's this isn't an actual cuticle itself, but here's something that you can an attribute to cuticles um, that you can use to help ID mushrooms. And here you see a peeling cuticle uh, in a Rosella species. This would be a copper Rosella, I believe. And you can take the edge of that cuticle and then peel it up almost like tissue paper. And that is a defining feature of certain mushrooms over others. Any questions at all about cuticles? Again, if you have questions, just interrupt me. Let Sandy know. Uh, what are cap margins? So the margin is the outer rim of the cap. We saw that at the beginning. A cap's margins are important for identifying a mushroom, and cap margins may change due to environmental factors. And in fact, you could say that about the cuticle itself. You could say that actually about almost any point here. For instance, a lot of mushrooms that have a smooth cuticle in very dry, hot weather, or when the weather becomes very high and hot and dry from a moist starting point, that cuticle will actually crack and have this strange cracked appearance to it. So this is a smooth margin. You can see there that there's nothing really just on that outer rim. There's nothing really of note. It's just what you'd expect from a mushroom. And an example would be the yellow stainer, which is a similar mushroom to what you find in the stores, but is mildly toxic. Another type of margin that we commonly see would be wavy, and I think that's self-explanatory. You can see how it's waving up and down there. Uh, Often seen in mature mushrooms or during dry weather. And an example would be an oyster mushroom. You can see these oysters are becoming quite mature. And yeah, they've got that wavy look to them now. Striate. So striation on a margin is basically deep perpendicular lines from the edge. And depending on species, it'll run part ways or even full ways up the cap. And it's almost like seeing the gills from above. And an example would be a grisette amanita, which we've found a lot of in this province. In fact, on the foray we did at Sandy's, we found quite a number of species of grisette amanitas, and one of their defining features is the striate margin. Enrolled margins. So that's where the margin is rolled in on itself. This often happens when a mushroom is young, but there are some species where this is quite exaggerated. Some of the milk caps, for instance, as well as this guy, the brown roll rim mushroom, which is again a very toxic mushroom that is very common in Saskatchewan, especially in city parks. So, what are mushroom gills? We're going to move on from the cap here. We're going to talk about what I would say is the next most important feature of a mushroom, and this is what your under the cap shot is supposed to be of. So gills are also called lamellae. Gills are plates that hang down underneath the cap, and then between the plates, the spores form, which drift down using gravity. Gilled mushrooms are called agarics. However, there are again types of mushrooms that don't have gills. There are some mushrooms that have little teeth hanging down or spines. And then there are, of course, mushrooms with a pored surface. So when we're talking about gills, we're going to start off with gill spacing. And again, this is vital to mushroom identification. Different species often have a range of spacing possibilities. And that would be, of course, dependent upon environmental factors, things like that. And there is no set terminology to describe spacing. That terminology itself seems to vary due to locale and preference. So the first one we're going to talk about is crowded gill spacing. And I've got a diagram there for you that kind of demonstrates. I think you get what I'm saying from that. The gills are pressed closely together and are touching each other. And an example would be a horse mushroom, which is another common mushroom in Saskatchewan that people eat. I love them. They have almost like this faint licorice smell to them. Quite good. But you can see those gills there. They're quite closely packed together. You can see these short gills as well. Often when you buy them from the store too, those button mushrooms that are still similar species to this, but they're still kind of in that like button stage. The gills are just really packed if you want to get an example for yourself to check it out. Next up, we would have close spacing, and that is where there is space between the gills. Though some gills, like you can see here, they still touch each other, especially when they're getting closer to the stipe. An example would be a Cortinarius. Again, a potentially very toxic species in Saskatchewan. And I do encourage you to join in on our Poisonous Mushrooms of Saskatchewan uh, webinar that I'll be doing next month, because as you can see from this presentation, there's an awful lot of poisonous mushrooms. So again, you can see these mushrooms are pretty close. Down here, as they get towards the stipe, especially, they start touching a little bit. And yeah, now, people will add little subheadings into these, like sub-distant or things like that. I'm just going to go with the three basics, and you should be able to figure it out from there. If you're looking in a book and it says sub-distant, it should be very, very obvious. And when I say distant, I'm talking about the space being enough between the gills that they do not touch each other unless you manipulate them, or like, you press around. An example would be a deceiver mushroom in the Lasaria genus. You can see these are touching, but that's more due to the shape. You can see quite a bit of space between those gills. Any questions about the gill spacing? Okay,
Is
then
that
I
a,
will
is
move
that a
on.
toxic one? Pardon me, Donovan, is
No,
the
no, all the
deceiver one?
Lasarias. The Lasarias are very interesting. There's a bunch of different species in the Lasaria genus, like the deceiver genus, and they look quite different from each other. But then the most common species, the deceiver, can look like any of the other ones as well. So it's a very interesting genus, but they're all edible. They have a faint radish-like taste. They're very common in Saskatchewan. We found quite a few of them at the August foray.
Are they found in
So,
in woodlands then,
yep.
not open land?
And well, they'll be found anywhere there's trees. To be honest, I found these in city parks where there's kind of like a little copse of trees and you go into it, and I found them there as well. So they're fairly common. I don't know if you would ever find them in grasslands, but any sort of wooded area, as long as it's moist and and a little bit dark. They don't really like the sun.
Okay, thank you.
Anyways, yep, no
Donovan,
worries.
there's another
Yep.
question here. Why are they called
Mm.
deceiver? The name seems toxic.
Oh, that's what I explained there. It's because that one mushroom looks like itself, but its appearance is so varied in the cap shape, the color, even the gill shape, how high it is, that it can actually look like any of the other mushrooms in the Lasaria genus. So they call it the deceiver mushroom because you don't actually know if you have uh, Lasaria, one of the Lasarias that is, say, kind of purpley, or the deceiver. But they're all edible. All Lasarias are edible. I'm going to talk a little bit about gill damage. If there are more questions too, just feel free to let me know. So, what am I talking about with gill damage? It's exactly what it sounds like. Damage to gills can reveal certain attributes you would otherwise not observe. And this is especially true of mushrooms belonging to the family Raceolacea, and that would include the milk caps and the rasulas. Other types of unusual attributes occurring after gill damage should also be noted for identification. So, first we're going to talk about latex. Mushrooms that bleed a liquid known as latex when the gills are damaged. These are the milk caps. And well, you can see right here, if you look closely, that's been damaged, and there are these beads of liquid appearing. And that's how we often know that we're holding an actual milk cap. And one way in which people who are really good at this can ID between the milk caps is they'll have those beads appear, they'll damage, and then they'll watch if they change color over time, that milk.
And what does that indicate?
That you have something in either the Lactarius genus or the Lactifluus genus, which narrows it down by thousands and thousands. Also, a lot of the Lactarius species are edible, so you could just basically flip in your book to Lactarius and avoid everything else, right? So
Okay.
yeah, it really, really brings it down. Uh, so here's one, and this is just brittle gills. We do have a massive uh, group of mushrooms called racillas that have gills that break apart by very little agitation. You run your finger across it. I think this might actually be one of mine. And basically, all I did was I ran my thumb across it gently, and it all broke away. So a lot of these Racilla species are edible, but what you actually have to do is you have to actually parboil it. Otherwise, it's like eating chalk because it just breaks apart so easily.
So
Bruising.
I have a fun fact about russellas.
Hmm.
First of all, if you have kids that are out doing a foray with you and you take a russella and throw it against a tree, it'll just explode, which is kind of fun for kids. But also, the reason that they're so brittle is because every cell in a russella is round,
Mm.
spherical. And so because they're spherical, they don't have anything to hang on to their neighbor cells. And so with any kind of agitation, they fall apart.
You know what would be fun, Sandy?
What?
When we find a whole bunch of Rosellas, we could have a Rosella fight
We'll add that to
instead of
the
a
next
snow fight.
foray.
Yeah, a Rosella fight. Yeah.
Sounds
So
good.
we'll talk about another type of. This is actually more than just the Rosellacea, like the milk caps and the Rosellas. This actually extends across many, many different species, and is one of the best identifying features, and that is the bruising of the mushroom. And that's when gills turn a different color or darken after being damaged, agitated, or due to aging. And like for instance, there's some slippery jacks that turn blue if you just push your finger lightly into that porous area or into the gill area. But an example here that we're looking at is a saffron milk cap. This is a delicious mushroom, by the way. And as you can see there, this orange is actually starting to turn green. And that is just a natural color change. It's not mold, and it will taste just the same with that greenish in there. But yeah, that's an important one. What is gill attachment? So the gill's attachment to the stipe is one of the most important observations for mushroom identification. Different species have a range of attachment possibilities, and there's no set terminology to describe gill attachment, which varies due to locale and preference. So when I'm talking about gill attachment, again, I'm talking about this gill attaching to the stipe and how it does so. And the first one we're going to look at is a free gill attachment. The gills terminate before touching the stipe. As you can see here, there's a space. An example would be a deer mushroom. Me and Sandy were actually talking about this earlier. Remember, Sandy? And you were saying one of the ways that you could tell between this and a different type of mushroom you were looking at was it has a free gill attachment. It doesn't touch the stipe. And these actually are edible mushrooms too. They're quite good. There we go. Add next. So this is where gills are barely attached to the stipe. You see it's going up there. It usually curves down a bit and just touches the stipe a little bit. And an example would be an enoki mushroom, which is again, you can see it curving down there and just barely touching that stem or stipe there. These are also delicious mushrooms, guys. They could start coming out as soon as April, I would think. They'll grow when there's snow. Um, the next one we're going to look at here is adnates, and that's basically cutting across and attaching directly, almost like in to some extent a straight line. They reach across and attach to the stipe, and sometimes they'll run it even a little tiny short ways down. An example, again, would be a deceiver mushroom. Remember what the deceiver looked like before? Here's another picture of one. Notice how the gills now look different and they're pink. If you recall, they can look like a whole lot of different stuff. And you can see the gills are just reaching across. Now I'm going to go back a little bit, so bear with me. We have adnates and we have adnects. Now remember when I said that gill attachments can have uh, more than one type per species? What I'm talking about is that when you have a mushroom that's often described as adnext, every now and then you'll get one that is free. And that could be environmental factors. It could be whatever it may be, just a weird shape to the mushroom, an outlier. But you'll also find them sometimes adnate. So again, another outlier. So every time you see something like adnate, remember that can also be from time to time adnext. And it can also be decurrent, right? And that is where the gills run down the stipe. An example would be an oyster mushroom. And you can see that there, the gills are running all the way down, some even touching the wood that it's connected to, some not. Um, yeah, that's a decurrent gill attachment. Any questions about that at all? Then I will move on. Okay, so what about other gill attributes? Because there's many other gill attributes that you can use for identification. I think the best way to document these other potential attributes is actually to take a very close-up in focus photo. It's far better to have too much information than to have not enough. And some of these attributes, for instance, that I would look for, serrated gills. This is a train wrecker mushroom, and if you look, you can see the gills are serrated. Even here, they're running to current down the stipe, and you can see there's a jagged edge to them. Forked gills. This is one of my favorite to find and eat. This is the grayling, or the humpback, some people call it. And most mushrooms don't actually have forked gills. They look like they're forked. So it's important to check. But for instance, this one, I can instantly tell what it is due to the color and the forking of these gills. Spores or spore deposit. We can see on here that this has rusty brown spores because of how many spores there are. If you were to run your finger on the stipe and into these gills, you would get like a smudge of rust brown on your fingers. And let me tell you, spore color is one of the most important features for mushroom identification. And just running your finger in there and seeing what color the smudge on your finger is a great way to do it. You can also take that cap and put a mature cap gill down on black or white paper or glass. Then you place a bowl over top and wait for a few hours, and you'll have a spore print. And then again, it's a beautiful thing, and it tells me right now that I'm looking at almost like a purpley black spore print. I believe that would be a magic mushroom, perhaps. I don't know. What is a mushroom stipe? So a stipe is the mushroom equivalent to a stem. It connects the cap to the substrate and the mycelium, which is kind of like the uh, hairy little network underneath the ground. And different stipe attributes are used to help identify a mushroom species.
Donovan,
Yep.
there's a question here. Would those even have a stipe then? Brittany, were you referring to the oyster or, sorry, I missed your comment at the time that it
I think
happened.
it was the oyster one where we were talking about the decurrent gill attachment.
Yeah. It would have a stipe because if you were to feel it, you can feel where the cap terminates and it becomes a solid structure, right? Because the cap is very thin. And then when you feel it, you can feel actually that there is a stipe that's attaching into the cap itself. As well, with gills, you can peel them away, right? It's an independent structure of the stipe. So if you were to peel the gills away, you would see more clearly that there is indeed a stipe there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
For sure. So we're going to talk about just the basic here, stipe shape. Some species of mushrooms have the potential for multiple combinations of shapes. And of course, this is important for identifying mushrooms. First off, we have cylindrical. That is, the stipe is of equal width from the top to the bottom. And you can see my cute little mycelial threads here. Um, an example would be, once again, a deceiver. And see again, notice how this deceiver is a completely different color than the other deceivers. You can see same width top to bottom. Clavate. So the base of the stipe is swollen, forming a club shape. And an example would be an aspen bolete, which is a wonderful mushroom to come across. You can see again, thicker here, almost like I don't know, the letter A. So that's a clavate stipe. Swollen stipe, kind of obvious here. It's thicker in the middle, um, and less so at the apex and at the base. An example of this would be a porcini, which is probably my favorite mushroom in the world to find and eat. And you can see a very exaggerated swollen stipe. Not all of them are going to look this exaggerated, but here you can clearly see what I mean. And bulbous, a cylindrical stem with a swollen bulb at the base. This is often found in Amanita mushrooms, and an example would be the fly agaric, which is uh, Amanita chrysoblema. You can see there. We're going to talk a little bit about this structure too later on, but you can see there's a bulb at the bottom. And finally, fusoid stipes. And that's a stipe that is much thicker up at the apex here and very thin at the base. An example would be a pestle mushroom. These are delicious, by the way. They're very sugary, if you can believe that. Okay, any questions about that at all? Pretty basic shapes. Well, we'll talk about the stipe attachment. This is something that often people won't even think to look at. And it's one reason why you need those photos, right? Because I forget to look at this too, but I can go back and be like, oh, okay, didn't see that. So this is the point at which the stipe attaches to the cap. Some species of mushrooms have the potential for multiple cap attachments. And again, it's important. So central attachment, that's where the stipe sits directly beneath the cap, creating a symmetrical structure. We would call that an agaric mushroom. And an example would be a meadow mushroom. I'm going to use this example again. You can see it's perfectly symmetrical. Uh, Eccentric. So this is an eccentric stipe attachment. And that's beneath the cap. However, it does not necessarily connect to the center. Sometimes it'll connect at other places and create a non-symmetrical structure. An example would be a hedgehog mushroom. And again, remember how I said that not all mushrooms have gills? Here's one that has the teeth that I mentioned. And as you can see, here and here, they're much closer to the right-hand side, creating this strange sort of overhang. And then finally, we have lateral. That's where the stipe connects to the cap from the side. And this is often found on mushrooms that grow off of trees. And an example would be an oyster mushroom once again, right? Because it's not underneath. There is another mushroom called an elm oyster, not to be confused with this sort of poplar oyster we're looking at, that does have a stipe that comes up and connects uh, at the center of the cap. And that's one of the ways we can tell the difference between the two. Okay, what other stipe attributes are there? There's quite a number. Um, you should record any unique attributes you notice, and you can never have too much information, as I'm going to emphasize here. Scaling. Some stipes have scales. An example would be a laughing Jim. You can see that's very scaly stipe there. This mushroom will actually make you hallucinate, so avoid it unless you don't want to. Pith. So pith is a cottony interior that dries and dissipates as it ages, leaving the stipe hollow. So when you found this as a very young mushroom, the stipe would be solid. If you were to squeeze it, it would feel very solid and firm. As it ages, that stipe hollows out, and you could squeeze it and know it was hollow. And this is a Rusula species. That's one of the species that will do this. So we're going to move on now to veils. Um, a veil is a structure that covers the gills while they are mature. And certain species may have combinations or various veil types, but usually not. And if available, a specimen with the veil intact when you're photographing, if you can find one that still has the veil intact, that's great to include, though it's more important to have the gills themselves. So we're going to talk about a couple different types of partial veil. The first is a membrane. That's a leathery membrane that covers the gills, just like you see in the stores with the button mushrooms. And you can see here, it's got this cogwheel pattern. This is a horse mushroom. Again, that wonderful, delicious, licorice smelling mushroom. A Aquirtina. So this is a very important one to notice. You can see here the mushroom has these sort of web-like structure that is covering the gills instead of a membrane. And one thing to note is that this is a Cortinarius species. There's a couple that have Cortinas, but this is the main one. And there's some very, very toxic Cortinarius species out there. So we tend to avoid all of them. And one of the things we're looking for is these hairy fibers left over from this Cortina web gill here.
Donovan, a
Yep,
question for you.
for sure.
Do most or all of the mushroom picks you have shown grow in central or northern Saskatchewan?
Yes. Yeah. All of these. Yeah. I can't think of any that don't. I think I was pretty careful to include only mushrooms that we find here, if that makes sense. So the other partial veil I'm going to talk about is the slime veil. And that is a thick coating of almost like mucousy slime that coats the gills. And often this will extend over the top of the cap as well. It's pretty gross. Um, but yeah, an example would be the aptly named slime spike, which I have found very far up north in Uranium City. And yeah, people do kind of wipe these off and eat them. They're supposed to taste okay. I don't because it, yeah, it's gross. And we have something called a universal veil. This is not a partial veil. This is universal and then it covers the whole mushroom when it's young. And you can see down there that this is what it looks like. We would call this an amanita egg or an egg, and it has not yet erupted. You can see a faint shape of a mushroom here. As it matures, that mushroom's going to burst out like these guys, and often it'll leave a bit of that veil on the top in like a patch or something like that. And then it will have what's called a cup or a vulva at the base of the mushroom. And this is a tawny grisette. I'm not sure if this one actually is in Saskatchewan, but it's again, it's a grisette, and we have many grisettes here. So I imagine we do have a brown one at somewhere. We're going to talk now about an annulus. So as the mushroom grows, that veil that we just looked at breaks away and forms a ring-like structure on the stipe. And this is an annulus. Certain species may have combinations, but an annulus also may be absent in some species due to agitation, weather conditions, or sheer lack of luck. As well, there's a lot of mushrooms that just simply don't have one. They just don't have one. So here, this is a flaring annulus. The annulus flares upwards, almost creating like a cup. And you see, like this is because it's broken away from the cap, and what remains is a bit stiff here and it's flaring upwards. An example is a pine mushroom, one of the best mushrooms you can possibly get to eat. You can see it flaring upwards there a bit. These are also called matsutake. Okay, so the next type of annulus we're going to talk about is a sheathing annulus. That is where the annulus sheaths the bottom half of the mushroom. An example would be a hollow bolete. You can see that sheath. This is going down there. These grow where I live. They're quite delicious. I encourage you to come to the August foray and find one. The next one is a very common mushroom type of um, annulus, and that is dependent. And the annulus hangs down. It can be a little ways, or it can be down like a skirt. Um, some of them, an example would be the mushroom that you get from the store. Sometimes you'll notice that they have those still left on them. Or it can be like this, like the flag egg, very, very large and floppy. We're going to talk next about, if you remember me talking about that little cup structure at the bottom, that's a vulva. And that is when you have that universal veil covering the entire mushroom and it breaks apart, but the whole bottom is cupped. And again, an example would be the tawny grisette. You can see that cup around the bottom. Now, there are many, many different ways that you can use a vulva shape to ID an Amanita type, because there are many different types of vulvas. I'm not going to get into them because it's a bit more advanced. And to be honest, we don't have a whole lot of vulvas mushrooms here. We don't have a wide range of Amanitas like we do in other parts of the country or the world, right? Like if you go further south into the States, there'll be places where there'll be like 40 or 50 different species. So just going to leave that for now. And we're going to return again to this initial slide here of the pine mushroom that you might find in a book. And once again, this might make a little bit more sense to you, right? Like when we say something is convex, flattening out with age, and it's the cap, sometimes becoming more depressed, right? We now know what a cuticle is and what it might mean if it's smooth or with brown scales. The margin is enrolled, becoming smooth. Um, Again, gills are crowded, adnex to adnate, short gills, right? We know a bit more about what that is. The stipe is cylindrical diffusoid with fibril scales. We have an annulus beneath, central attachment. The veil is thick, membranous. The annulus is flaring to slightly sheathed, right? That should all make a bit more sense, hopefully, to you now. Um, I do believe we're going to try to get this out to you as a PDF so you can go over it a bit more on your own. And again, this is very basic. So there's like, for instance, here it says flaring. I don't think we went through what flaring means. Maybe we did. But there's a whole lot of in between terms of these things. I'm just doing like the basic points of reference. But if you want, there's always more to learn. And then thanks for watching. These are the photographs provided by Donovan Thiessen, that's me, Alan Rockefeller, and Amy Kirk. Oh, and this is the only no, this occurs. This is a yeah, okay, that does occur in Saskatchewan. That's a verpa. And once again, I'm going to return us to the dates for the mushroom forays so you can come out and practice the knowledge you just learned alongside us. Sandy, do you have any questions or anything?
Thanks very much, Donovan. Uh, just to remind people, if you would like to be on the mailing list, you can send it in to saskmycology@gmail.com or add it into the chat here, and then you'll get first notification of any forays or other events that we do. You can see we've added save the dates, so we're trying to get our act together early this year, which I think we have done successfully. The specific areas that we're going to be going to, we're not 100% sure, but these are the dates that we're going to be doing: June 27th, July 25th, August 22nd, 23rd. And then in the next month here, we'll decide what date our September foray is going to be. So,
Also,
does anybody have any questions?
I've got one more question. Can you
of course.
overpick mushrooms? Like if you like I say I had quite a haul of mushrooms here this over the summer and that. Do you have to leave some go to seed?
Ah, I mean, there's different ideas on this. Depends on the type, right? Like if you're talking about chaga, yeah, you can overpick them. If you're talking about something like one of the reishi polypores that take a very long time to grow, like years and years, you don't want to knock everyone off the
Hmm.
tree. But like for terrestrial mushrooms, not really. I mean, if the mushroom's open, it's already deposited into the wind hundreds of thousands of spores, right? Just leaving it to rot that's how you're doing it, right?
Right.
What's more is if you're walking through the forest, I do encourage people to use wicker baskets or pails with holes in the bottom, because when you put your mushrooms in there and you're bouncing around, it's actually dumping the spores out the bottom anyways. A lot of those mushrooms are sitting there. The actual organism is quite large, usually underground, and most of the spores that are falling are just landing on top of itself, right? The mushroom itself is just a fruit. That's
Okay.
like, for instance, picture an apple tree and all the apples fall to the bottom because you left them there and they're rotting and the seeds stay right at the base of the tree. It's not going to grow another tree, right? There are things that have to happen. But if you were eating the mushroom, walking or eating the apple, walking a ways away and then throwing it, I mean, would that help? Probably. I don't know. That's a weird analogy I just made up on the spot. Hopefully it makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
Are there ways to encourage more mushroom growth near your home or farm?
Sure. Um, I mean, for some stuff, yeah. I mean, for anything that is, help me out, Sandy. What's the opposite of mycorrhizal?
Um, Put me on the spot.
Me too. Mushrooms that just consume. I don't know.
Pamela.
Saprobic? Saprobic?
Saprobic.
Or yeah, 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 that's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, if you take those and you kick them around your farmyard, sure, you'll spread spores around and they'll grow in the grass or in the manure or whatever. Like for instance, I always tell people if you're lucky enough to find one of those giant 5 pound puff balls, feel free to take it home, let it turn to powder inside the puff ball and kick it around like a soccer ball on your lawn. Then maybe you'll get them next year. Same with those meadow mushrooms, or those, what do you call them? The shaggy manes that turn to black ink. Chuck those somewhere where there's been,
Mhm.
animals walking around or grass that's kind of got some decay beneath it, and they'll grow just fine.
Mhm.
One thing I
Hello.
will say is that it's
Are the shaggy
very,
mean
very,
spores
very.
still muted?
Am I muted?
No, they're talking about
Oh,
themselves.
oh, okay. Um, yeah. Any further questions on that? I like questions.
I do have one question. There was that, I think it was like the last picture, the last mushroom picture. I forget
Hmm.
what you were showing now, but the gills looked interesting. And I was
I'll
curious what
take a look.
kind of gills those would be. It was
Are we
maybe,
looking at this?
no, go one more back. Okay, another one back. Sorry. One more back.
It's okay. We can just keep going.
Okay, I'll tell you when to stop.
Okay.
This one, yeah. Those gills,
Oh,
I was curious about those gills.
those aren't gills. Those are pores, actually.
Okay.
So remember I said that some have teeth, some have pores. This
Right.
we have a group of mushrooms just loosely called boletes, and this is one of them. This is the hollow bolete, and it's got a series of pores. I do think that this is quite a beautiful mushroom. Um, the pores underneath almost look like gills. You could almost say, hey, that almost looks like the missing link between gills and pores. But yeah, it's also a delicious mushroom to eat.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep, for sure.